Welcome to a chilling Halloween tale, where costumes are not just playful disguises but also hold dark secrets. In this story, we follow Vance, a cultural researcher obsessed with the sinister origins of Halloween costumes. As he delves into ancient legends, Nicholas must confront unimaginable entities and uncover a world where darkness never truly fades away. Join us as we embark on this dramatic and mysterious journey. Vance sat alone in his dimly lit study, the faint glow from the desk lamp illuminating the pile of ancient books spread across the table. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather, relics from his most recent expedition. For months, he had been obsessed with uncovering the origins of Halloween costumes, something most people regarded as a harmless tradition. But Nicholas knew that the darkness hidden within these costumes had never been fully told. He carefully flipped through the pages of an old, leather-bound book, its corners frayed and worn. This was one of the few remaining texts from the 18th century, documenting the ancient rituals of Samhain, the Celtic festival that predated modern Halloween. The first page sent a chill down his spine. Costumes don't just conceal humans from monsters. If used incorrectly, they turn humans into monsters. Nicholas frowned, his heartbeat quickening. Turned humans into monsters? He inhaled deeply and continued reading. According to the text, in the earliest traditions, people didn't just wear disguises to fool malevolent spirits. Some costumes, made from animal hides and human bones, were imbued with dark spirits, allowing the wearer to take on the essence of the creature they dressed as. But if the ritual failed, these entities would take permanent possession of the wearer's body. A handwritten note scribbled in the book's margins sent a shiver down his spine. Beware old costumes. They carry the ghosts of those who wore them last. A sudden draft slipped through the cracked window, making Nicholas shudder. He jumped to his feet, hurrying to shut it. When he turned back, an uneasy feeling pressed against his chest, like someone was watching him from the shadows of the room. His eyes landed on an old costume hanging from a hook in the corner. It was a recent acquisition from a flea market in a small northern town, a crumpled black outfit with a distorted, grinning mask. Staring at the costume, Nicholas felt as though it was breathing. The mask wasn't just a piece of decoration. The empty eye sockets reflected the dim light in a way that made it seem like something inside was watching him. He had collected costumes steeped in history before, but this one felt more alive than any other. Nicholas tried to ignore the unsettling feeling and returned to his desk. He flipped to the final pages of the book, where a ritual involving costumes was detailed. He read aloud from a section of the text. Every costume is both a disguise and a doorway. When worn, it allows the wearer to cross the boundary between human and monster. But be warned, some spirits never wish to return to the other side. The lamp flickered. Nicholas looked up, startled. Shadows along the walls began to shift, and he swore the mask's grin on the old costume stretched wider. As if it had just heard some secret joke, he sprang to his feet, cold sweat breaking out across his skin. It felt as if something unseen had crept into the room, weaving through the costumes that hung around him. The whispering began, soft at first, like the wind sneaking through cracks in the walls. But the voices grew louder, clearer. Come closer. Put it on. Halloween is near. Nicholas felt an icy touch on his shoulder. He spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, except for the old costume standing quietly in the shadows, waiting. And that was when the horrifying truth hit him. They were awake. Nicholas Vance slumped in his chair, closing the ancient book with trembling hands. His heart raced, not just from the disturbing truths he had uncovered, but from the unsettling atmosphere that seemed to have taken hold of the room. Each time his gaze drifted toward the old costume hanging in the corner, the crooked grin on its mask appeared even more pronounced. Something was wrong. These costumes were not mere artifacts, they were waiting. But what were they waiting for? Nicholas knew he had to uncover the truth behind the history of Halloween costumes. Those moments when darkness from the supernatural world seeped through fabric, binding itself to those who wore them. He headed to the local archives, where folklore records and unpublished documents were tucked away in dusty corners. There, among the old newspapers and forgotten clippings, Nicholas found unsettling stories about strange disappearances linked to Halloween costumes. One article from 1928 sent a chill down his spine. On Halloween night, a group of children from a small town wore strange costumes crafted by a local tailor. The next morning, they were nowhere to be found. Their costumes were discovered scattered along a dirt road leading to an empty field. As if their clothes had slipped off their bodies without explanation. No trace of the children was ever found. Nicholas swallowed hard. The disappearances couldn't be a coincidence. These costumes had become doorways for something, a force not of this world. Digging deeper, Nicholas uncovered disturbing patterns throughout history. Over centuries, those who donned eerie costumes often met strange, horrifying fates. During the Middle Ages, it was believed that dressing as a demon could result in a soul being swapped with a real demon. In certain ancient rituals, costumes were used to disguise sacrificial victims, deceiving gods and spirits alike. That night, Nicholas returned home, but his apartment felt different, like something had shifted in his absence. The old costume hanging in the corner seemed out of place, as though it had been moved. The fabric appeared slightly disturbed, as if someone, or something, had touched it. Hesitantly, Nicholas approached the costume, his hand hovering over the grinning mask. "It's just my imagination," he whispered to himself, though deep down, he knew something strange was happening. As Nicholas lay in bed, a faint scratching sound echoed through the room. He sat upright, eyes scanning the darkness. The sound came again, this time clearer, originating from the old storage chest where he kept the antique costumes. Heart pounding, he crept toward the chest, lifted the lid, and stared inside. The masks inside seemed to stare back at him with their hollow, empty eyes, as though they had been waiting all night to be released. Just as Nicholas began to close the lid, one of the masks whispered, barely audible, "Wear me, let me become you." Nicholas stumbled backward, cold sweat breaking out across his skin. He realized, with growing dread, that he had awakened something that should have remained dormant. These costumes weren't lifeless objects, they were alive, and they were waiting for Halloween to take control of someone's body. And Nicholas knew he might be their next victim. Nicholas's home was no longer a safe haven. Since bringing the ancient costumes into his apartment, every corner seemed to pulse with a strange, unsettling life. Inanimate objects, coat hooks, storage boxes, and even the costumes themselves began to shift inexplicably. Whenever Nicholas entered his study, he felt an eerie presence, as if unseen eyes were tracking his every move. At first, he told himself it was all in his head, paranoia brought on by sleepless nights and obsessive research. But soon, things spiraled beyond reason. The costumes hanging on the hooks seemed to change positions when he wasn't looking. And the grinning mask now wore an even more twisted, sinister smile. Each night, Nicholas fell into restless sleep, plagued by recurring nightmares. In these dreams, he wore the cursed costumes, standing among a crowd of revelers on Halloween night. But unlike the others, he was no longer himself. He had become the creature represented by the costume, prowling the streets in search of living souls to hunt. A bloodthirsty excitement surged within him, a terrifying hunger he could not control. When he woke, he felt drained, as if the nightmare had been more than just a dream, like it had truly happened. The most disturbing part, however, was the growing urge that gnawed at his mind, a strange voice whispering, "Put it on." During the day, the apartment remained eerily calm, but when night fell, darkness crept into every corner, and his home became a refuge for shadowy figures. Nicholas began catching glimpses of dark shapes flitting past the edges of his vision, there 1 second, gone the next. At first, he dismissed them as tricks of exhaustion, but as the nights passed, the figures appeared more frequently, as if they were slowly emerging from the very costumes hanging on his walls. Despite his attempts to stay rational, the oppressive sense of being surrounded by something invisible weighed heavily on him, making it impossible to focus. With each passing night, the shadows drew closer, and the whispers in his mind grew louder and clearer. "Wear it, our night is coming." Finally, Nicholas could take no more. He decided to destroy the costumes once and for all. But as he opened the storage box to carry them out, the darkness in the room surged. The small desk lamp flickered violently before going out, plunging the room into pitch blackness. Nicholas stood frozen, his heart pounding, as the overwhelming presence of something malevolent pressed in around him. Then, through the silence, he heard it, a raspy, distorted laugh coming from the crooked, grinning mask hanging on the wall. In that instant, Nicholas knew the horrifying truth. Bringing the costumes into his home had been a grave mistake. These weren't just objects, they were portals. The spirits of those who had worn these costumes in the past were trying to return to the living world, using his body as their vessel. And with Halloween fast approaching, time was running out. Soon, they would take him. Halloween night had begun, and with every passing hour, the air around Nicholas grew heavier, as if the door between the living world and something far darker was slowly swinging open. The costumes in his apartment now seemed to move on their own. Fabrics rustled, masks shifted slightly, and the folds of each garment whispered secrets to one another. They were waiting, and Nicholas could feel it more clearly than ever before. He no longer felt safe in his own home. His eyes landed on the old costume with the crooked, grinning mask hanging on the wall, and he knew it was alive, not in flesh, but animated by the will of something born from darkness. The masks were no longer harmless decorations, they were faces, eager to be worn, ready to possess anyone foolish enough to put them on. Nicholas tried locking the door and leaving the house, but every time he approached the exit, an invisible force blocked his way, pulling him back. A horrifying thought slithered into his mind. What if he had already been marked? What if he no longer controlled his own body? In a panic, he stumbled into the bathroom, gasping for breath, staring into the mirror. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. But the reflection staring back at him wasn't his own. His face in the mirror was twisted, identical to the distorted grin of the crooked mask from his study. It was a smile filled with malice and cruelty. That wasn't him. Nicholas staggered backward, feeling as though his body was slipping away. Piece by piece, a whisper rose from deep within his mind. Wear me, let me become you. The whispers grew louder, relentless, like a curse he couldn't escape. At that moment, the clock struck 11 p.m. Only 1 hour remained until Halloween would end. Nicholas knew that if he didn't break the curse before midnight, his body would no longer be his own. The costumes would take his soul, leaving him as nothing more than a ghost in disguise. Just like the victims in the old legends he had uncovered. He raced back to his study, where the costumes still hung silently on the walls. Watching him, these were no longer lifeless objects. The clothes had swelled, heavy with the presence of something waiting inside, ready to take him over. He knew that once he put them on, there would be no way out. Frantically, Nicholas gathered the costumes, doused them with oil, and prepared to burn them right there in his study. But as soon as he struck a match, the flame sputtered and died, snuffed out by an invisible hand. A cold gust swept through the room, and the windows burst open, revealing a sky as black as ink. Then, he saw it. His own shadow stood in the center of the room, but it wasn't him. This version of himself wore the crooked, grinning mask. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, and its twisted smile radiated pure malice. It had come to take his place. It's too late, the figure whispered, its voice as cold as the wind howling through the open window. You called us back. Now, let me become you. Nicholas felt the breath of evil creeping into every corner of the room. The twisted doppelganger of himself stood there, clad in the grotesque costume, its eyes dark as a bottomless pit. Halloween night was nearing midnight, and Nicholas knew his time was running out. He was acutely aware that if he didn't stop this dark version of himself, his soul would be replaced forever. You called us back, the creature wearing his likeness sneered, its voice echoing like a call from another realm. Now it's time for you to belong to us. Nicholas rushed toward the nearby oil lamp, where the flickering light still had enough strength to keep the cursed spirits at bay. But as he approached, his wicked doppelganger lunged forward, swift as a cold wind, seizing his wrist and pulling him down to the floor. The two identical figures grappled, and in the darkness, Nicholas felt himself begin to fade. Each second that passed, he seemed to lose touch with his very essence. He knew this battle wasn't just physical. The darkness was trying to take root in his mind, draining his soul until nothing remained but an empty shell. In a moment of desperation, a spark of clarity ignited in Nicholas's mind. Fear was what fueled these entities. The ghosts in disguise could not possess him if he faced his greatest fear, the fear of powerlessness, of losing himself forever. Gathering every ounce of strength left within him, Nicholas forced himself to confront the twisted image of himself. He stared directly into its black, hollow eyes, and for the first time, He stopped running. "I am me," Nicholas declared, his voice ringing with newfound determination. "And you cannot replace me." His words sliced through the invisible tether binding his soul like a sharp knife. The darkness around him howled, writhing and dissipating like smoke before dawn. The grotesque doppelganger screamed in its final rage before vanishing into the shadows, leaving the crooked mask to tumble to the floor. Lifeless, Nicholas dropped to his knees, breathless yet filled with relief. He had triumphed. As the clock struck midnight, the light from the oil lamp flared one last time, incinerating the cursed costumes and pushing the spirits back into the void. Nicholas stood there, alone in a room now filled with ashes. He had survived, but had the darkness truly vanished? Days later, Nicholas cleaned up the remnants left in his home. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. But each night, before he went to sleep, he still sensed something lurking in the corners of the room. The twisted mask, even though it had been burned, lingered in his mind like a haunting reminder that the curse of Halloween had never truly disappeared. It was merely waiting for another moment to return. Nicholas's story has come to a close, but the haunting he faced was not just a nightmare. While he survived the battle against the darkness, the curse of Halloween still lingers, hidden, waiting for its chance to return. Can the light of truth chase away the darkness forever? Or has Nicholas, the one who awakened these ancient entities, inadvertently become a part of it? Remember, in this world, not everything you see is real, and there are some things we should never explore. Thank you for following this story, and we hope to see you again on our next chilling adventures.